Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, we've got Goze joining me here in Las Vegas, along with Danny Segura in Miami and Mike Bohn in Toronto. So let's jump right into it, guys. It was a busy weekend in MMA with both the UFC and Bellator holding events, but it seemed like a majority of the eyes were really on Yoel Romero, who ended up suffering a decision loss in his Bellator debut against Phil Davis. Now, after the result, we're kind of left to wonder, at age 44, did Romero finally show his age, or are there still some big wins ahead for the Soldier of God? What is left in the tank right now for Yoel Romero? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Goze, get us started.
That's still a difficult question to answer. I mean, for the longest time, Yoel has had Father Time's number, right? But this weekend, he kind of had a little bit of a disguise, I feel like. And in disguise was 205 pounds. Because no matter what, it's 205 pounds. You could always just lean on, guys, what do you want from me? That's not my weight class. Let me go back to middleweight. You'll see the real Yoel Romero. We all gave Israel Adesanya a little bit of a mulligan, right? When he went up to 205, we all forgot about that. Now he's just back to being the menace that he is at 185. So he could always do that. Look, he didn't have very much output. So it's not like we could say, you know what? He's losing a step in the later rounds. He's starting to get tired. He didn't do very much. And then he didn't really know how many rounds were in the fight. That was the most confusing thing for me. So at the end, he could even say, I still had a lot left in the tank. It's just I didn't know how many rounds. So he had the perfect disguise for the situation. The one thing I can say, guys, I feel like he lacked the explosion that he usually has. He didn't have that. So if you're going to say he did lose a step, I'm going to say it's the explosion that we lost a little bit. But I think he still does have a lot to offer. It's just not at 205. Please bring him back to middleweight. He has great matchups there. I think he could still show us a little bit. Not for too long, but he still has a little bit left.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there on the weight class. And the whole round thing, that was just truly bizarre, if I'm being honest with you. Danny, what'd you think? What'd you take out of the situation in this whole fight?
I think you guys are crazy. I mean, it was a close fight. It was a split decision. One judge had it 29-28 for Romero. I'm just kidding, guys. No, but in all honesty, like, it wasn't a terrible performance for Romero. We got to keep in mind this is his first time fighting in the pandemic age, right? So, like, it's been a while for him. Also, a new weight class, new promotion. There's the whole situation with the rounds thing. I think we saw a good Yoel Romero. I think there were some issues there. We got to keep in mind Phil Davis. I mean, former champ at Bellator, still a very, very solid fighter, and kind of a bad matchup for him, to be honest, now looking back. I think Romero's still there. I think he's still game. But it's just about, again, getting comfortable with the promotion, getting back into the rhythm of competition. And even if there's been a slight drop-off, I don't think it's been big enough to the point that we're not going to see him win again, or we're not going to be able to see him in elite matchups. I still think he has a lot left in the tank. We got to remember, he's got less than 20 fights in his record. He started fighting at age of 32. So it's not like he's got a ton of mileage like some other veterans that we saw retire this weekend. So yeah, I still think he's game and he's got a lot left.
I briefly thought Danny Segura had lost his mind there for a minute. Mike, what do you think? Is there big wins ahead for Romero, or do we finally see in his age?
Depends what they want to do on the matchmaking front. I think it's Bellator. They have a lot more flexibility to give him a fight where he's going to be a much more sizable favorite. I said it last week on the show. I thought this was poor matchmaking from them coming in. Yoel Romero, even if he had won this fight, he wasn't going to look good in doing so. Phil Davis has never been finished in MMA. And we saw how difficult it was for Romero to get offense, get anything even meaningful in this fight. So for him, it was kind of a setup to have either a loss or a showing where he would win, and it wouldn't do much for him. And it turned out to be the former. So I think this was a tough spot for him. But you see glimpses in there. I mean, against lesser competition, I think he can definitely get the big knockouts if you give him a more style-friendly matchup. I think the Anthony Johnson one. Obviously, best wishes to Rumble with whatever's going on with his health. But if he can get healthy, I think that would be a great fight. There's other guys they can pluck from around the roster that would give a much more exciting fight with Romero, and he can definitely win. So I think this was kind of the same guy we've always seen. Very sporadic offense. It was, some of the same stuff we saw against Israel Adesanya. So he goes in there, he does his thing. Sometimes we get the big moments, sometimes we don't, and this time we did.
Yeah, great point on the matchup itself, kind of dictating how things play out. Let's not feel for Yoel Romero. At 43 years old, our physiques are real similar. We're kind of going through similar things in life. I understand. I think there's still big moments. Yoel, I'm with you, guy. I got you. Guys, we had 26 bouts to take in on Saturday between the UFC and Bellator, so that's a whole bunch of athletes who did have their hand raised, even if we didn't crown any new champions or guarantee ourselves any future title contenders, at least immediately. So in your opinion, let me ask you, who walked away as the star of the night between those two events? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Danny, you get it started.
I'm going to go with Deanna Bennett here. Danny, over here. I'm going to go with Deanna Bennett. I think she had a magical night, really, if you look at everything going into the bout, right? She was on a bad losing streak, 3-fight losing streak, but I think she had only 2 wins in her past 10 performances that dated back all the way to like 2016 or something like that. She was going up against Alejandra Lara, who's very, very good, former title challenger, and had been looking good in her last previous fights. And yeah, she was fighting in her hometown, the SAP Center, which obviously had a SAP Center, which had a very emotional tie to her, given that her late father used to work there in MMA events and other events as well. And it was just a perfect night for her. I would say the only like little issue there was the weight issue. But all in all, I think she looked great. She got a win. She looked good, which is the most important part. I think her wrestling looked good. And I'm curious to see how she is going to fare against other flyweights in Bellator. I really do think she's got a bit of a future. And it was a key victory considering that she's 36 years old and, she needed to prove that she can still hang.
Yeah, great shout there. Emotional moment for her, emotional night, and she really turned it in. Mike, what about you? Who was the star of the night?
It's got to be Anthony Smith, right? I know he's kind of the easiest choice there, the headliner of the UFC card, which obviously comes with a lot of clout in itself, but he showed up, man. I mean, this is another one of those matchups, 3rd time in a row against a guy that was doing good things in the light heavyweight division. He dispatched of Devin Clark, he dispatched of Jimmy Crute, and then he goes in there. And I think his finest win, of that streak against Ryan Spann, his hands were great, the submission skills, he was just a mile ahead when it came to the grappling from Spann. I think he really went in there and put a stamp and showed that he needs to be fighting these upper tier guys at 205. The Anthony Smith story is great. The fact that he even had his initial title run at 205 after the career he had previously outside the UFC being cut, his whole story and everything like that. But it seems like after that Glover Teixeira beatdown and then just the super uninspiring performance against Alexander Rakic, we had been, ready to write him off as someone who's not going to be relevant in the title picture. And he's really emerged. He's taken the tough fights. He took a step down and he's really delivered now. So all credit to Anthony Smith. He went in there and showed that he is a player at 205 pounds in the UFC, and maybe he could even be on the trajectory towards a second UFC title shot.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I feel like we all keep waiting to just write Anthony Smith off, right, and say that it's over and it's gone, and he just keeps showing like, no, I still matter. And as you said, maybe another title shot in his future. Goze, what about you? Who walked away as a star for you?
Look, guys, I think Bellator needs stars, and MMA is more exciting when there's a Gracie at the top of it. And I love what Neiman Gracie did out there this weekend. He was fighting Mark Lemminger, but at the same time, he was fighting himself. He had a lot to prove. He was not happy with his last performance, and he came out, and I think he rectified that a little bit. He's carrying a lot of frustration in an interview that we were talking with him about the situation that he's had, and he's gotten a lot better. And for him to finish the fight with strikes, when do we ever see a Gracie finish the fight in that manner, showing that there's not just grappling to deal with, you got to worry about his striking. He really, really just took the bull by the horns in that performance. And then at the end, he mapped out what he wanted to do next. And some of the names he threw out there, I think, are very interesting. I love everything he did that night. And I think some of those matchups could really turn out some interesting fights for Neiman Gracie. So I think he stole the show in my eyes.
Hey, listen, that's a great shot as well. Like you said, a Gracie finishing things with strikes. So you guys threw out 3 pretty solid answers there. I'm going to have to say all 3 of you are wrong. There was only one correct answer here, and that was, of course, Ben Parrish. Shout out to Big Tuna. Come on, man. Getting it done with the upset and then delivering on the microphone. Big Tuna in the house, man. Sign me up for the fan club. Well, guys, a couple of UFC and WC legends called it a career this past week with both Joseph Benavidez and Carlos Condit electing to hang it up. Now, here's a tough one for you, but I think it's a perfect one with the UFC Hall of Fame getting a few new members this week. If you could only place only one of those guys in the Hall of Fame, is it Benavidez or is it Condit? This is like some Sophie's Choice here stuff. Guys, let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Mike, you get it started.
Tough to say Joseph Benavidez, but just because you look at Carlos Condit, a former interim UFC champion, got that WEC belt, and Joseph Benavidez never hold that gold. But I do think he is the one, just because of the impact he had on the sport. Of course, his fighting accomplishments were great, but he was one of those torchbearers at 125 pounds and even 135 pounds to a degree before that. He was the first guy at 135 or below to reach 20 UFC fights. We can talk about the records, like the number of wins, finishes, knockouts. He's right up there in all those categories. Of course, the one that will stand out from the people that want to criticize him is the fact he had 4 UFC title fight losses. But you guys know how hard it is to make it to a UFC title fight. To get there once is difficult. To get there 4 times, I know it's a thin division, and he's one of the guys who had the bigger names, but that is a remarkable achievement. So Joseph Benavidez, I think he had the body of work to get in there. I think, maybe it will be a long time down the road. I don't know in what, exact criteria he does make it in, but I think if an opportunity for him comes around, he will eventually find his way in there. I just think he's done a whole lot for the sport. And if I'm going to cheat a little bit, though, I do think Carlos Condit's going to make it in, but it's going to be in a Clay Guida manner, in that he's going to get in the fight wing for his fight with Robbie Lawler.
Shout out to Mike Bohn for taking the gorgeous George route there and just picking everybody. I like the play there. No, listen, it's a tough one. You laid out a great scenario there, but as you said, the caveat with Condit having the belts, that's what I was curious if that might be the one. So, Goze, what do you think? If you could only put one in, which one is it?
It's a difficult question. I made sure my front door is locked before I make it. But yeah, that list of WEC fighters is getting smaller and smaller, guys. Both guys had great careers. Joseph helped build a division that gave a lot of people jobs. Carlos Condit's responsible for giving tons of fighters nightmares. He never backed down from any challenge. So there really isn't a wrong answer. But I think if I look at Carlos Condit, I'm going to say he's a really good fighter standing in a room with a lot of really good fighters. I don't know that he stands out as much the way Joseph Benavidez does in his division. So I got to go with Joby One Kenobi, boys. Look, man, who can say that they were a part of building something, building a division, coming from the WEC where he was at a disadvantage, not having that weight class, and still competing with some of the best up there. Those fights he had with Dominic Cruz, he gave everything he had. He helped build a division. He feels like family in the UFC, and he's only lost to the top dog. So not only did he help build a division, but he helped maintain it for years. There was never a fight where you felt like Joseph Benavidez didn't come in 100%. He always fought. He always gave everything he had. So Joby One Kenobi is my choice.
Goze bringing props. I think I'm kind of happy you didn't pick Natural Born Killer. I don't know what you would have brought in there. Danny, what do you got? Which one would you put in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, this one's a weird one because Carlos Condit had a belt in WEC, had a belt in the UFC, an interim one, but still a title. Became really close to putting away George St. Pierre, which few people can say that. I think Matt Serra, and other than that, maybe Johnny Hendricks. Yeah, so he's had obviously a really good career, but I think what Joseph Benavidez has been able to do as far as staying at the top for so long is so remarkable. I mean, all respect to Carlos Condit, but after that Robbie Lawler fight, we really saw a different version of him. And he was able to put some exciting fights, some competitive fights, but being at the top, being a top 5 fighter, those days kind of faded away. Whereas Joseph Benavidez, till his very last fight, he was still a top guy, and that's extremely hard to do. So I'm going to go with Joseph Benavidez here. Also, the fact that he was inaugurated a division, right? I think the only active fighter from the original 4 is Demetrious Johnson. So, he kicked off an entire division, had a lot of success at 135, 125. I just think his legacy is much bigger.
I'll tell you, that was such an evil question. I'm glad I didn't have to answer it all. I feel bad for putting you guys in the hot seat.
Answering that, man.
I know, right? We have a lot of respect for both of us. But I think it's so cool that everybody sided with Benavidez. I think it just goes to show that even the fact that he didn't attain the level of champion, that we all have that level of respect for the fighter that he was. But truth be told, we know both those guys are going to make it in the Hall of Fame at some point. So glad I didn't have to answer that one. We got, speaking of UFC and WC greats, how about the news from One Championship? The Demetrious Johnson is going to have a mixed rules fight with Muay Thai legend Rodtang Jitmuangnon. So what are we thinking here? Should organizations like the UFC be more open to kind of wild, crazy ideas like this? Or does someone need to be protecting the sanctity of MMA and keeping the structure in place? What do you guys think about this idea? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Goze, break it down.
I don't think the UFC needs to do things like this in particular, But they do need to start having a little fun. I mean, if you look at the no fun league, right, the NFL, at least they bring back throwback jerseys, things of that nature, right? In this episode, we brought up the WEC, right? Hey, throw Dominic Cruz and Jose Aldo in there and let them fight with WEC gloves. I mean, give the fans what they want. Give us a ramp every now and again. You're going to be going to Allegiant Stadium. That place is huge. Give us the big ramp. Give us some fireworks. Change things up a little bit. The Sinead O'Connor entrance, that was epic, right? We still talk about that. We're not saying do it every card, but maybe do some of that type of stuff. You got Shogun, you got Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler. They're still pride fighters, right? I think Shogun's the only one that actually did it in Japan, though. For his last fight, let's bring in Len Hart, put her back-to-back with Bruce Buffer. Let her do Shogun's entrance. I mean, there are so many little things that you could tweak. When you look at the competition, you look at Bellator, they got the Grand Prix. PFL has a season and points. One Championship's doing this type of thing. UFC, you got to do a little something. We're not saying to reinvent the wheel, do anything crazy, but maybe bring back a tournament. Have you seen how stacked some of these divisions are? UFC do a little bit more, but maybe not to the point of this.
Okay, I like it. So we're not getting totally nuts, but we're bringing in a little bit of flavor. Danny, what do you think? Should UFC be open to crazy stuff like these mixed rules fights, or is that just too bizarre?
I like the UFC product the way it is. I do think that the UFC being sort of the elite level of mixed martial arts, I'd like to just kind of keep things the way that they are. But I do like one championship being able to experiment and sort of bend the rules a little bit and add things here and there, because I do find it important. I do think that within all this, maybe we can find something that really does benefit MMA in the long run, and it can be implemented, whether it's, you know, messing with the length of the rounds or changing the rule set a bit. So I love what one championship is doing here with Demetrious Johnson. I wish we could see a little bit more of that sometimes in other organizations. But as far as the UFC, maybe I would agree with Goze as far as keeping it fun with, you know, gloves and entrances and stuff like that. But as far as the rule set, I like the way it is in the UFC, and I don't think it should change. So UFC, stay the same. Everybody else should probably experiment a little bit.
Yeah, there's something to be said for at least them kind of being the highest level and keeping order there and making things the same way in and out, the history, that sort of thing. Mike, what do you think? I mean, this mixed rules, I think we're all intrigued by the fight itself. So does that mean more people should be doing it? Or is this just, hey, they struck on something this one time?
I think, well, for one, obviously they have a different product than what all these other companies. The fact that they do, you know, Muay Thai and MMA gloves, and we'll do, you know, a grappling match on a card or something like that. We've already kind of seen them mixing their cards together in terms of what the fights are and the rules, and now they're just bringing it all together. They're plucking one of their Muay Thai fighters and putting them against one of their MMA fighters, and I think it's something that they're able to do that works for them, but I don't think that's something the UFC would be able to pull off because they don't have that type of flexibility with the roster. So I think, one, for what it is, they're doing a great job in kind of maximizing the benefits of their product. But I don't think the UFC should do something like that, nor do I think they would. UFC, obviously, they're a multi-billion-dollar product, so who am I to sit here and say they're doing this wrong or that wrong? I do think, to Goze's point, they could do some stuff to change up the presentation. I mean, you can, especially when we were traveling around, they could go to Japan or Brazil or Russia or whatever, and aside from maybe like the intro shot of the arena, you're basically watching the exact same broadcast, the same product. It's indistinguishable, no matter if there's 10,000 people or 30,000 people in the crowd. So there's things that can be improved on and done there. And as far as adjusting the rules, I think obviously the UFC is the industry leader. If someone was going to experiment with open scoring or things like that, I think they would be able to benefit the industry as a whole, because what they start doing, others are going to start doing. So I think on that front, I'd love to see more of it, but they're obviously doing extremely well in their own right, so they have no really incentive to at this point.
It is weird to me, though, that the UFC is so hesitant to embrace the brands that they already own, right? Remember when we did Quintet Ultra and they had the different organizations? I thought that was so cool. So to your guys' points, I would like to see them at least embrace products that they already own. Think about this, man. What if the UFC did go crazy? They're like, oh, by the way, you remember how we told you we signed Alex Pereira? Oh, but he's going to kickbox Israel out of signing. We're going to do something crazy. We're going to put on that one again. I don't know. I like what the UFC is doing, but it would be fun to see them open it up a little bit. We got, speaking of the UFC, it's a big week for them. It's International Fight Week, in fact, and UFC 266 got a couple of title fights up at the top of the bill. We got the long-awaited return of Nick Diaz, who's back in the mix. We might have Dan Hooker taking a taxi from the airport straight to the weigh-ins on a Friday morning. We don't know there's a lot going on. So tell me, what's the most intriguing storyline of this week from your perspective? We'll put 4 minutes on the clock. Danny, you can kick it off.
209, baby. Those three numbers right there. I mean, it's got to be Nick Diaz, right? How long have you been waiting for this moment? We've been waiting for a Nick Diaz return for years. And every year is the same thing. Nick Diaz is interested in coming back. And we kind of just get our hopes up time after new headlines pop up, but nothing ever comes to fruition. Finally, we got a fight booked, and it's against Robbie Lawler, a rematch that happened like 17 years ago or something like that. So it's just insane that this moment has finally arrived. It's almost like if it's not real, it's crazy. I'm super excited about this one because look, Nick Diaz is a fighter that if anybody can come back after such a long layoff in their late 30s and actually still be elite, I would actually put the name of Nick Diaz up there because he's never been a guy that throughout his career relied on athleticism like some other guys that we see that get older, their reflexes get slower, speed, strength, etc. And all of a sudden, they kind of drop off. Nick Diaz has always been a guy that relied on skill, on his mentality, of that warrior mentality. And athleticism has sort of been a thing that comes behind. Sure, the cardio is a big thing, but I feel like cardio you can maintain for a long time. You don't necessarily need to be young, right? So I'm really hoping that Nick Diaz comes out here and really has a good return because maybe he can just become a player at 170 pounds and not just this guy that we can put into fun fights. So for me, this fight's just amazing. We'll see what ends up happening. I think the way that he looks, the way that he shows up, if he wins or not, will be very telling on his future. But the possibilities are endless here. I'm excited.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that, man. We've all waited years for this, and it's finally here. Pretty unbelievable. Mike, what about you? Is that the biggest storyline for you? Do you see something else maybe?
It is Nick Diaz for sure. I don't know. I think if anyone's pretending it's not, they're lying to themselves. We all want to see this return, and we're really fascinated by it. But I do want to give some love to some other spots on this card because it is a really deep card. People outside of Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler deserve the attention too. And of course, the two title fights I think speak for themselves. For me, I'm really interested in seeing what happens with Curtis Blaydes. I know there's not too many people who sit here and say they're looking forward to a Curtis Blaydes fight all the time, but coming off that knockout against Derek Lewis, I'm really, really curious to see what happens with him. He's fighting another devastating striker, at times in Jairzinho Rozenstruik. What's he going to do with that? Is he going to be able to, mix up the grappling and the striking less predictably than he did against Lewis? And just how is he going to bounce back off that? If you're Curtis Blaydes, you're obviously sitting there probably being Ciryl Gane's #1 fan at the moment, hoping he beats Francis Ngannou in their unification fight, because then that sets up another opportunity for you to kind of go after the title. So really important fight for Curtis Blaydes. I think this is going to be the one that tells us, is he the guy that maybe some of us thought he would be, or is he just completely removed for that after some very key losses in this division? So I'm really kind of circling that one as an important fight on this card outside the top three.
Yeah, I really like that. Good shout. That's a big one that's flying under the radar. It's going to have some real meaning. Goze, what about you? What are you going to be paying attention to?
Guys, as you look at me, I'm not the young stud that I used to be. I got a lot of gray hair in my beard. And so I'm looking at some of the veterans on this card. And the veterans seem like they have this positioning where they can make some waves if they give a good performance here. So let's look at Roxanne Modafferi, right? She can get things back on track. She's a crafty veteran. You got Magic Marlon Moraes. Every magician has a great trick that they save for the very end. And I feel like Marlon Moraes has to pull that trick out right now, because now is the time for him. He's got to put on a great performance. And then, you're right. How can you get away from the Diaz brothers? Nick Diaz, I want to focus on something a little different from him. How about the rivalry between brothers? Right now, my brother's not here, Gorgeous George, but he knows what it's like to be overshadowed by the younger brother. Nate Diaz is kind of taking some of that clout from Nick. Can he steal that back? That's kind of like an underlining thing that I'm looking at, and I think he can.
I love it, man. This really is a deep card. I mentioned the Dan Hooker situation on the flip side of that fight. Nasrat Haqparast is going through some emotional times as well. Looked to be a great fight already. Now we know they both have a lot of super deep cut. How about Manon Figueroa? She looks like the real deal to me, man. I think she's a potential title challenger in the future. So a lot of big fights, to say the least, at UFC 266. And look, busy weekend. We got UFC. We got one championship, LFA, Bray. There's going to be big fights all over the world. There'll be plenty of stories to talk about. We'll do it all next week on Spinning Back Clique.